Sometimes a Vegas week in July drags like a year, and sometimes it's so action-packed it seems like we've squeezed a year into 7 days. And with the news flying fast and furious, yeah, it's like that right now. Today on CityCast Las Vegas, I'm here with Reformed reporter Jacob Solis and CityCast co-host Sarah Lohman, and we're discussing the controversial Lone Mountain Mormon temple vote finally happening, an unlikely alliance when it comes to getting rid of taxes on workers' tips, and so long Mirage, but also what's going to happen to the hotel's freaky statues. It's Friday, July 20th. I'm David Figler, and here's what Las Vegas is talking about. I want to jump right into our busy agenda of news items, but there is another tidbit that we don't want to miss. Jacob, Sarah, you want to guess what it is?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I have a guess. Is it famed Pahrump judge Michelle Fiore being indicted for allegedly misusing charitable funds?
No, Jacob, but we are going to be watching that one for future episodes for sure. Sarah, got a guess?
The first time the phrase famed Pahrump judge has ever been used. I am going to guess it's politics, and I would say it's probably something with Biden's big visit this week.
Yes, ding, ding. We do have to mention that not only did President Biden visit Las Vegas this week, but he left with a sad souvenir Wednesday afternoon after a day of literally pressing the flesh at Mario's West Side Market in Lindo, Michoacan. Joe Biden tested positive for COVID. And around 4 o'clock, he canceled some scheduled appearances, shot out of town on Air Force One, and tweeted out, "I'm sick," which is not an uncommon tweet for someone who just did a few days in Vegas. But here, we do wish the president a speedy recovery. All right, let's jump into the rest of the news. The Lone Mountain LDS Temple vote happened. Jacob, how'd it turn out?
Well, you wouldn't believe it was a unanimous vote to approve the temple. Should I roll through exactly what this is for the uninitiated?
Please.
I haven't
been following this. It's so exhausting. Yeah. I need the summary.
But I also want you to paint a picture of like the scene at City Hall. So yeah, let's do a little background first.
Okay, a little background. Basically, in the Lone Mountain area, right? So what is that? Northwest Las Vegas. They want to build a very large LDS temple. This would be the second LDS temple in Las Vegas.
How big are we talking?
Okay, it's a 20-acre plot, so large. The property is going to be, like the main temple will be 70,000 square feet, plus a 16,000 square foot meeting house and another 1,600 square foot grounds building. And the steeple on the main temple was originally supposed to be, I believe, 216 feet tall. Mm-hmm. They scaled that back in the vote that was amended to 196 feet. And this is funny because the FAA regulations would require any building above 200 feet-ish, I believe, to have a flashing red light on top to warn airplanes that there's a building there.
Wow.
So, yeah, compromise achieved. No flashing red light, unless the FAA could still say so. But for now, there will be no flashing red light.
So a lot of people showed up to that city council meeting. Why so many people?
Well, because people are concerned about the character of the neighborhood, David.
What is that neighborhood like?
Well, look, I don't live in Lone Mountain, so I won't, You're
not mocking, you're just
No,
reporting.
Look, it's, look, anytime you get sort of to the outer rings of Las Vegas, it starts to feel the same. Look, one person complained that, to the city council that this would make it impossible to do horseback riding out there because of the traffic. So I think that might speak to the kind of person who is upset.
The urban rural.
Yes.
Which sounds like a oxymoron, but we do have these sort of little enclaves of rural preservation.
Ranch districts, yeah.
That are more than city adjacent, that they're kind of seamlessly transition from the urban city environment into these sort of outlying areas. And they all have big houses out there too.
Yeah.
So what were some of the compelling arguments on both sides of this issue, whether or not this temple should or shouldn't be built?
Well, on the should side, I think the Mormon church, there are people may not be surprised to learn that there are a lot of Mormons in Las Vegas. And so for a lot of people who live on sort of the outer edges of town, it can be a giant hassle, say for a wedding, to get down to the main LDS temple.
Which is over on Hollywood on the very, very eastern part of Las Vegas. If you take Charleston all the way up, you kind of run into it over there.
That's right. So so there's frankly a lot of folks on the west side of town, right out in Summerlin or the environs beyond, now in sort of the northwest, right? Because there's so much development out there. So a big argument is essentially, look, driving anywhere in this town is a giant hassle. And now it's like an extra hassle. So this sort of serves a large population of people. The anti-argument is that this is a giant friggin' building in the middle of a neighborhood that is not used to such giant buildings.
Did you hear a little bit about this controversy before it came to this final vote, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, mostly just through what we've covered here. And this is just personal preference, but it was really, I could tell one of these things that I just could not handle. Anything that involves a lot of really loud public opinion that may be tinged by some sort of close-mindedness on either side, all sides. Like, I'm already rubbing my forehead. I knew this was something that I could not spend time on, or I would go into a dark place. That's my newsy take.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say reflexively, anything that has sort of the whiff of NIMBYism, I sort of reflexively cringe. But on this one, it's such a weirdly specific example because the building is so large and it's like a real place of worship. It makes it slightly more complicated. However, what I will say is that if there's any city that's used to randomly tall buildings emerging in the middle of nowhere, it's Las Vegas.
There is that.
It's going to be spotlit. It's going to be up high. It has to be a feature of the neighborhood. It's going to be a huge architectural feature, physically large part of the community. So I do understand, some of the general involvement.
This isn't just a run-of-the-mill church that we see in any community. I mean, this is the big one. This will be a placemaker. Certainly, the Mormon temple that I reference on the east side is a placemaker. People say, oh, yeah, out by the Mormon temple or near the Mormon temple. And so it does become instantly part of the landscape as the iconic part. In much the same way that the Sphere did, out of nowhere. And now, the Sphere is just ingrained as a landmark. Yeah. But the neighbors were really getting feisty. I know there was a lot of harsh stuff going on in the social medias, especially the Reddit. Oh my God, I'm like the old man who has to put the in front of everything. The Facebook.
Oh, have you been on the Reddit?
Yeah,
the
have
Facebook, the X,
Reddits?
the Reddits. Yeah. I mean, it got nasty.
Yeah.
What I was seeing was just a lot of this is corrupt. The LDS Church has way too much power and influence. The city council people are bought and sold by these big Mormon favorable law firms and all this other stuff. And, it got a little feisty, I think is an understatement.
What I will say is it's a feature of local politics in particular that sort of the power of lobbying firms and lawyers who have the ability to just lean on local politicians is outsized in a way that maybe isn't as true on macro levels, right? In Congress, for instance. It's still a feature, but it's even more concentrated in something like a city council or a county commission. So sure, and I'm totally sympathetic to that. But it's also there are a lot of Mormons, man, and they got to go somewhere. So,
well, I will say this and I watched a little bit of the hearing. What kept coming up was the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Person Act, which is an old 2000 congressional act, which was introduced by, no surprise, Orrin Hatch of Utah, which adds in extra protections for religious institutions when they're going up against these sort of land use issues, which seem to be at the core of Lone Mountain. At what point does one group's religious or spiritual needs cross that line of encroaching into the neighbor's needs, or maybe even offending on some level neighbors who are non-believers?
Yeah. Does that include the evangelical Christian need to take away my abortion rights, reinstate Comstock laws, and also do away with no-fault divorce?
Oof. Oh, well, maybe if they just had a rotating, flashing billboard like they do at Little Darlings that kept pushing that message into your neighborhood, you might have the issue there.
If it was punnier, I would be more into it. I mean, look, I think that you've got to a couple great examples of where these laws have protected, let's say, minority religions across the country too. Isn't there one about there's now a mosque in Michigan that's allowed to a call to prayer?
Yeah, and there was a complaint about that of being too noisy and the
Right.
noise ordinances. And there's another example. There was a Buddhist temple in Los Angeles that faced backlash because they did weekly food festivals there, because it was just too much according to the neighbors. I mean,
Yeah.
so where is that?
So our country was founded on the diversification of religious beliefs. There were certainly
Absolutely.
fights about that early on, but also great support of it too. We forget that although there's a lot of talk about the founding fathers nowadays, they were largely atheist and agnostic, and so that is where this desire to protect religion came from. However, of course, we still, for the time being, are a majority Christian country with a lot of Christians in power. So it is fascinating to me that this law is actually ending up protecting minority religions like Buddhism and like a Muslim temple, right? But I think that we only have this conversation when it involves a minority religion and not when it involves Christians wanting to do something obnoxious. I don't know what my point is. Maybe it's that we should
wait,
talk about
do you think that this building is obnoxious? I guess let's commit you to this one way or the other.
in general, which of course obnoxious is a very relative term because a call to prayer can be extremely beautiful, but I don't live next to a mosque, so I don't know how that would feel. I don't know. Actually, I do think I would like it, honestly. So like that is the whole idea, right? The Lone Mountain neighborhood didn't want this giant spotlit red flashing light, huge building in their neighborhood. But, when was the last time we had this conversation about a church or a cathedral, right?
Like if this was a regular Protestant megachurch that looked like a Walmart, like would we be like,
Boom.
would the reaction be the same?
I mean, First Amendment's so hard because on the one side, you can't establish a religion. On the other side, you can't do anything that prevents people from worshiping. Where do you think this falls, Jacob?
Look, frankly, like what else are they doing with the land out there, right? And I think that like this, it's not like this is coming out of nowhere. There's, I think, a specific community need that's been demonstrated by something like this. There are frankly just a lot of Mormons here. Like I know I grew up, I'm not Mormon, but like I don't have to go too far in my extended family to find Mormons. I like had a bunch of Mormons I went to high school with. So like
I know a lot of ex-Mormons at this
also
point.
true. Frankly, also true. And so like the church just has a lot of power here, but it's like, it's tough. It's tough. I don't think that they don't have like, I'm not convinced by the First Amendment issue. I think it's like more of a regular land use issue. I think like traffic studies and stuff need to be done. And like obviously the FAA concerns, right? Like I think good that they got rid of the giant red flashing light, but like I'm sort of unconvinced by the NIMBYist arguments like that this shouldn't exist for XYZ reason. I guess I'm just not convinced by those arguments.
Well, the one interested party who didn't pipe in, of course, being God, and we don't know if God's a NIMBY who doesn't want any of these tall buildings encroaching upon his cloud heaven. So interesting conversation, but it looks like the temple's going up. Okay, next topic. Senators Jackie Rosen and Catherine Cortez Masto have now joined in on the no taxes on tip effort that came from an unlikely source. Sarah, what is this new alliance that I'm hearing about?
Yeah, so at a June rally in Las Vegas, former President Trump said that he was going to exempt tips from taxation for wage earners. A little unclear if that meant Nevada or if that meant everybody. He said he got the idea from a cocktail waitress. I don't believe that. Can you ever imagine Trump asking anyone what they want or need? That being said, it came up at a rally and people were like, is he just saying this or is this happening? Ted Cruz proposed a bill and our two Democratic senators, Catherine Cortez Masto and Jackie Rosen, have both signed on. And so it's actually now becoming a little bit of a movement to not federally tax, and we don't have state taxes here in Nevada, tipped wages. So I think that people are most surprised by this because it's been a long time since anything bipartisan has happened, basically since the Dick Cheney era. So Rosen said, Nevada has a higher percentage of tipped workers than any other state, and getting rid of the federal income tax on tips would deliver immediate financial relief for service and hospitality staff across our state who are working harder than ever while getting squeezed by rising costs. Unsurprisingly, the Culinary Workers Union Local 226 supports both Senators Masto and Rosen and this new proposed law.
Well, just a month ago when Trump had said that, the Dems and their allies came out saying, this is ridiculous. This is just straight up pandering. It's not a real thing. It's not something serious. Ted Papageorge, who's been on this show, I would call him a friend of the podcast at this point because he's come on and talked to us a lot. He's the head of the local Culinary 226. He was quoted saying, Nevada workers are smart enough to know the difference between real solutions and the wild campaign promises from a convicted felon. Spicy. Now they're all doing a 180, Jackie Rosen and CCM on it. Is this a beautiful example of this bipartisanship of which you speak, Sarah? Or, guys, is this a cynical take on opportunism on the part of the Nevada Dems?
I mean, I feel like there can be a lot of cynicism right now. I'm feeling pretty cynical after it's felt like a real 8-year slog, right? And I'm glad that we have a direct quote because I also don't want to speak in hyperbole and just say, oh, the Dems didn't like it when it came out. We have to have like grounded options here, right? But yeah, I mean, literally, Dick Cheney is one of the ones who figured out that the way to get reelected as Republicans is to just strongly oppose anything that Democrats are doing. And that was also the era where Republicanism took a hard right turn into a world away from human rights, in my personal opinion. So it has been a really long time, coming up on 20-odd years, since we've really seen bipartisan legislation. And it would be really nice to come back to a time where someone has a good idea, irregardless of party, and then it gets bipartisan support. So this, I think, I believe it was
stuff
Rose.
Of substance because they're always out there passing like, let's name the post office after Where's Waldo?
And we did it together. See, we can be bipartisan. I'm sorry, I don't remember if it was Masto or Rosen said that, this is one tool we can use to make things better for the working class, but let's start with this one tool. That's a paraphrase.
What's your take, Jacob, on that quick switch, though?
I mean, frankly, the quick switch is on the GOP side because we should look. Trump was president, lest we forget, and his one major legislative accomplishment was a tax cut. So curious that he didn't think about cutting these taxes at the time, and only now, when he needs to win Nevada, does he go to a state where there are so many service workers and starts waxing poetic about taxes on tips.
Calling out the opportunism.
You know what? Can I say it actually is a little bit of a call out because he said it to Culinary in June that this would be the first thing that he did as president, which a lot of people were like, well, that's not possible because of the way like actual government works. Like other things have to be in place. But now with this bipartisan bill, those things are going to be in place that should he be elected, this is one of the first things he could do as president. So money where your mouth is, let's see.
Well, we're talking about doing away with taxing tips, but I think it does beg the question, are we just nipping around the edges? I mean, should this not be the end, but the beginning of a bigger conversation about, wage reform more broadly and just the perils of tipping?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think, frankly, in this modern economy, I don't think that the tax structure is kept up with, say, like the gig economy or like I think any 1099 worker, right? If you have to fill out that tax form as a freelancer, knows that tax burden sucks.
Yeah,
and like
Jacob preach. Double tax, right? Freelancers are double taxed for people who don't know. We pay taxes like we're an employer and an employee.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I think that there's a lot of like sort of quote unquote common sense tax reform that needs to happen. But that doesn't get talked about because it's not snappy in a campaign ad like we're going to cut taxes on tips are. So
well, that's the whole thing, right? Is that we're, either applauding or looking cynically at people like Jackie Rosen who are coming on board with this, Ted Cruz bill. But should we be pushing them all for? Well, let me ask it this way. Not should we be pushing them? Why aren't they talking about these bigger things now that they have this platform?
Well, frankly, I think these structural reforms are just so difficult to talk about from a campaign lens. Like normal people really don't understand tax policy. Politicians, frankly, don't understand tax policy unless they're in those like committees and in that world. So it's such a difficult conversation to have. And I feel like it's almost impossible. I mean, look at what happened with the IRS, right? The IRS gets like, 80 however many $billion to like beef up enforcement. And that gets characterized as like the IRS is out of control. But in reality, they're just like targeting rich people, right? And making sure that those people pay their taxes. So it's so difficult to have any conversation about taxes because it can sort of quickly be weaponized whatever way you want, you know?
I mean, but of course, that's something that Sanders is a pro at, though, right? When we've got our true liberal Dems out there, they are able to put this in language that people understand. And the basic language is that the tax burden shouldn't be on most tipped people. It shouldn't be on freelancers. Folks, I get 20% of my income goes directly to taxes. And I'm down with paying taxes. I love a road, you know? I love a piece of mail. That I love state option healthcare, but it's a lot, right? And it's a lot for, let's say, a cocktail waitress whose wages are coming from tips. That being said, I do really support the elimination of wages based around an accommodation for tips. No one wants their life dependent on whether they get a good shift or not. I know one of our sister cities, CityCast sister cities, Washington, D.C., they've had a very messy rollout of a $15 minimum wage or no tipping economy, essentially. I'm also curious, too. I have so many questions about what would happen. Would people tip less, knowing that the person who's receiving the tip is not going to be taxed on it? I know that people who are in tip.
So you're saying like more bang for your tip buck?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you $1 instead of $2, right? That people are going to make that thing. Also, I know that people who are getting tipped wages, they don't report all of those wages, right?
Yeah,
that
that's
is
what I was saying.
How the system works.
There's some weird practical stuff out there. Well, look, I mean, Las Vegas is a hospitality hub. I mean, it is our prime economy is tourism and hospitality, and within that is a lot of tipped workers. I mean, this is a very, very important issue for Las Vegas. So I'm not surprised that the Dems did not want President Trump to be able to own that. So that's number one. But number two, it is complex and it does deserve sort of more thoughtfulness than just sort of like you guys are saying, that the platitude or the easy campaign ad. You know, we did an episode here on the podcast with local-based writer Brittany Bronson, who was for a very long time a worker who relied on her tips in our economy. And she had some really thoughtful takes on how we could do some reforms, what the sub-minimum wage is all about, and how that's kind of a bad thing, too. But anyway, I hope people would go on our website and take a look at that episode as a nice supplement to this particular Friday News Roundup. So this is the last story. You know, people have their feels when a storied hotel casino gets shuttered on the Strip. We felt it for the first time when those oldies that had been there over half a century got imploded. Places like the Desert Inn, the Stardust, and the Riviera. The Tropicana's on its way. And this week, the Mirage closed after 34 and a half years. But one curiosity for all of them is what becomes of the artifacts, you know, those magnificent or even quirky objects long associated with the properties. Now, for me, you could have your volcanoes and your aquariums. My favorite weird item at the Mirage was always the monument to Siegfried and Roy looming outside over the sidewalk behind a small fence. If you've walked over there, you know the statue I'm talking about. It depicts the two magical showmen's heads, giant heads, slightly dazed with bewitched eyes and flowing hair. They're very close to each other, and also close to them is an open-mouthed and maybe lunging, maybe plotting white tiger, spoiler foreshadowing, on a clump of stone and for some reason crystals. Now, it wasn't made with the most durable materials. Pieces have deteriorated over the years. But now with the hotel closing, this enchanted sculpture has to go somewhere, hopefully not into a garbage bin, like some other hotels have done in the past. But it's now rumored to be headed to the Neon Museum. But what did Siegfried and Roy mean to Las Vegas? I mean, I'm making a little fun of it, but I do love that statue.
Can I just say, too, as a historian perspective, I really love the sort of trifecta of preservation that Las Vegas has now. We are not historically the best place at preserving or even recognizing we have our own history. And we saw this happen with the Trop as well, where basically UNLV, the Lead Library Collections, the State Museum, and the Neon Museum basically meet with the institution and decide how to divide up the collections. I know, it's cool. So the Neon Museum is taking big physical signage like the Siegfried and Roy sculpture, which is a little bit outside of what they've traditionally collected. So I think it's really cool that they're taking this in. UNLV Lee Library, they take paper ephemera and documents, whatever the casinos will give up, because some of that goes on the burn piles. There are secrets. And then State Museum will take other physical objects. Like they might take something in like a Siegfried and Roy costume. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
But to answer your question, David, the legacy of Siegfried and Roy, I actually just want to shout out an episode that we just aired about the history of animals on the Strip, where an amazing scholar talked about what this tiger show meant. It was a huge turning point for animal shows on the Strip, and also probably we'll never see anything like it again. There's now too many guidelines in place protecting the audience from large cats. And
Something happened?
Yeah, so that's going to be kind of the end of animal shows like that on the Strip. And also, of course, a lot of morality questions about working animals, too, and their health and safety.
How about you, Jacob? Did Siegfried and or Roy show up on your cultural radar in any significant way?
This is fun for me because I guess I'm on the line between millennial and Gen Z. I'll hold on to that. But like, I think I was still sort of like outside the range that like I would have seen Siegfried and Roy in their heyday, like on the Strip. So I only got the cultural like backwash. So like, I know like they show up in The Simpsons and stuff, or like Siegfried and Roy is one of those like iconically Vegas things that like, if you need to signify that this like fake place in a TV show is Las Vegas, you throw in like a Siegfried and Roy parody.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. But like, I never watched the show. And I only kept up on the news about, the things going wrong.
But you're right. It's so much of a cultural zeitgeist that, like, everyone understands the reference.
Exactly.
I mean, they were so emblematic of a certain style on the Strip. They were the kings of the Strip in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And, they were here forever. They really started their shows here in the 60s. In Las Vegas with their debuts, and they had been in a number of different hotels, including the Frontier, before Steve Wynn kind of scooped them up and made them more or less immortal. And so that's why these statues actually resonate with me. In my old poetry days, I used to do odes to the statues because they're just so weird and creepy and big and
I love them.
In a lot of places misplaced. But, look, at the end of the day, it's just two ordinary guys trying to make a buck. And,
you say they're misplaced. They absolutely belong at the Mirage. They fit
misplaced in this sort of just like out of nowhere. They just kind of like pop at you out of like a little gardeny area. It's just, and there's not a lot of context to it either. And now it's all gone. And hopefully the Neon Museum or whoever they land with will take care of them in a good way and celebrate them, even though they were often the subject of jokes. Let's just be real. There were jokes, Siegfried and Roy jokes here and there. I don't want to be morbid or anything, but if we had statues dedicated to us, Jacob, Sarah, and me, what would your Siegfried and Roy-esque statue be, Sarah?
Well, definitely crystals and lasers are going to be involved.
Crystals and lasers, absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. I actually want to tell a story about my incredibly fabulous mother who lives in Ohio. And I think when she and my dad were buying their cemetery plots and they went to the funeral store, there was she called it a weeping angel 12-foot tall stone memorial that was like $32,000. And she told me about it right away. And I was like, well, obviously I'm going to get that for you, Mom, if it makes you happy. That's what I'm going to spend my bucks on. But I was like, why should we wait? Like, if I'm going to spend $32,000 on a memorial for you, we're putting it in the backyard. So while this hasn't happened yet, this is my promise to her that I will buy it before she passes so that she can enjoy it in her life. So definitely my crystals and lasers statue is going to be just out the front window of my house. The transition windows, as I've been told they're called, on sort of the front. What is that called? The turnaround? It's not a yard.
Yeah.
It's some rocks. It's some rocks and a turnaround. And in the middle will be a statue made from crystals and lasers of me.
Nice. I mean,
Excellent,
I wish we had a CityCast headquarters that we could put all these things out of, but this is going to be in front of your house. I love it. Jacob, how about you?
Now, my gut instinct was to go with some sort of 100-foot tall Soviet stone thing, but I think the real answer is that I want something. I want something a little let's go classy. A bronze statue is a classic, obviously, but I want something ridiculous. So I think there's that like statue of Simone Bolivar, I think, in Washington, D.C., over by like one of the embassies. I don't know. I'm pretty sure such a thing exists, but he's a guy on a horse. So this is why I demand a statue of me on a horse. Have I ridden a horse? No. But being a statue on a horse instantly makes you more commanding, and people wonder why you rode that horse. That is my legacy.
My art history professor told me once that important people point at things in paintings, so make sure you get that in too.
Oh, you got to get the point in.
Something.
Yeah.
Well, for me, first of all, it's going to be 220 feet tall so that there's a flashing red light on top of it at all times.
Per FAA regulations.
And let my neighbor NIMBYs try to fight me on that one.
Can it be inside your skull so it just flashes at the top of your head?
Wherever. I mean, whatever the FAA allows with regard to creativity. But yes, there needs to be the flashing red light on top. That it has to be that tall. Also, God will appreciate that because I can visit with him because I'll be a little closer to him.
That's right. That's right.
I want to immortalize not just myself, but, my time here in Las Vegas with my bandmates, the Tippy Elvis band. I want all of us memorialized together. Siegfried had his Roy and Roy his Siegfried. I've got my Ginger Bruner and Brian Weiss and Sean Jones. And a rotating series of drummers. We'll have to figure that out. Like the memorial will change. We've had somewhere around 20 or 25 drummers in the band over the years. So that would be a rotating statue that would come in. Paco would be the one right now, but we'd also have a Joe Malone and others, etc. But the feature piece of this memorial would, of course, be, because my band was a punk rock polka band, Ginger Bruner's tuba. There's just not enough statues and memorials that depict big brass instruments like that. So
would all
that would
the
be the
members
feature piece.
Be 220 feet tall or just you, David?
I think just a tuba would be 220 feet. So the tuba would be the real draw. But then all of us bandmates would kind of be along the bottom.
Beautiful.
That's
perfect.
us. Well, speaking of perfect Friday News Roundup, y'all. Jacob, Sarah, thanks for joining me this week.
Thanks, David.
Thanks so much for having me.
That's all for today here on CityCast Las Vegas. Our producers were Sonia Cho Swanson, Layla Mohammed, and Natalie Rivera. Our newsletter editor is Rob Katcherreese, and our hosts are Sarah Lohman and me, David Figler. Music is by OG Moose, Epidemic Sound, and All the Kimonos. We record the show on the traditional homelands of the Nuuvi, the Southern Paiute people. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend? Rate the show too, leave us a review, we read them all, and subscribe to our morning newsletter, Hey Las Vegas. We'll be back Monday morning with more news from around the city. Till then, stay lucky.
Look, all I'm saying is that when Trump said he wants to cut taxes on tips, he's also saying he wants to cut taxes for corporations. So, I don't know. These things don't exist in a vacuum.